Hey, Rue here. I just wanted to take a moment to clear up our timeline. This episode that you're about to hear was recorded around a month ago, along with the other two which we're dropping today. We researched and found that publishing 3 podcasts at once supports new podcasts in the algorithm, so we've been working on this project for the last month or so. That said, we felt that it was important to contribute our voices to what is happening in the world right now and release the episode we did when we did because Jesse and I are both staunch supporters of Black Lives Matter and wanted to offer our support and help spread awareness. It was important to us to have that conversation within this platform, and we wanted to offer a moment of respite to the people on the front lines as well as fighting for justice in whatever way is accessible. This fight is far from over, and we encourage everyone to get involved and continue to contribute in the capacity that is accessible to you. There will be links in our show notes once again for ways that you can get involved and contribute to this movement. Please bear with us. Since this episode was recorded, we have both gotten better equipment and gotten more savvy with editing and have gotten a little bit more comfortable being on microphone. It gets better from here on out, and we're glad to have you.
Okay, Rue, manifest yourself.
All right, manifested. Do we need to do the weird clap thing that everyone's doing on Zoom?
What's the clap thing?
I think it's to make sure that you're synced at the same time.
How do you do that?
I think you just 1, 2, 3, and you clap, and if it
Okay.
happens at the same time. Okay, 1, 2,
1, 2,
3. Oh.
Okay,
1, 2, 3. Okay, I don't know.
I feel like we got it.
Yeah, I keep hearing people do it, and I'm like, do we have to do that? But, yeah. Are we introducing each other or ourselves?
I was going to say, and I'm talking to Rue.
I don't know how to introduce each other. How do other people do this?
Let's just start over.
Okay, let's just start over.
Okay, Rue, manifest yourself.
Hey, that's Jesse.
And that's Rue. And we are going to talk to you today on Supposedly. We'll do deep dives into archaeological discoveries, curses, ghosts, true crime, and so much more. So thank you for joining us today.
Since we are brand new to this endeavor, do you want to tell the people a little bit about yourself?
I'm Jessie Burkett. I am an actress based out of Kansas City. I do mostly commercial work, a lot of indie films, and a ton of B-roll horror. I'm a huge paranormal freak. I love everything strange, macabre. My favorite TV show of all time is Unsolved Mysteries. So I'm so excited to talk about some of the things we're both interested about here. How about you, Rue?
I'm a nerd in general. I'm kind of a Renaissance gal. I'm an artist, thespian, writer, all that jazz. And I am currently living in a tiny village in Germany, which I feel like qualifies me to talk about especially weird and strange traditions. Krampus is for sure going to come up at some point. Let's just put it that way.
We're definitely talking about Krampus. So why are you in Germany? I know, but our listeners don't know yet.
Yeah, so my husband's in the Army, and so we're here. But I'm also from Kansas City and desperately missing barbecue and everyone I know. You a lot, but the barbecue.
I miss
I
you
want to
too.
hang out with you and eat barbecue at the same time.
And talk creepy stuff.
Yes, obviously. That's a given.
So Rue and I kind of decided to make this podcast after quarantine pandemic. Every week we've been getting on Zoom, talking to each other about some creepy things, watching episodes of paranormal shows together. In fact, Manifest Yourself comes from one of our favorite lines from Mr. Zach Bagans. Zach Bagans?
Baggins?
He changes it every episode.
I like to go with the Smeagol. Bagginses.
Bagginses. He is the ghost investigator we love to hate and love to mock.
He's almost too pure to hate.
You can hate him. You just gotta love him for the bumbling fool he is.
Yeah, he's just an oaf.
So during one of our Zoom encounters, we were talking about a bunch of creepy stuff and said, hey, why don't we turn one of our weekly get-togethers into a podcast? And here we are.
Because that's the one thing we can do across the ocean. How are you keeping yourself busy during quarantine? We've been in Germany, it started a little bit earlier, but everyone's pretty much been in quarantine for 2 months at this point.
That seems about as long as I've been in.
Okay.
We actually went in 2 weeks earlier than everyone else here in the Midwest because we were exposed very early on by a friend who works at a hospital.
That's right.
So we went into quarantine 2 weeks before everyone else. So we feel like we're 2 weeks longer ahead of it than most of the people that are quarantining. And Kansas is getting ready to open back up right now. And that's a terrifying thing because my roommate and I have both been super, almost overly cautious. We wash our hands, we sanitize, everything's been delivered, we wipe everything down before we bring it in. It's just been kind of a crazy situation, and I'm so excited to be able to get out of the house, but not until after this stuff is passed and we're in the clear. How about you?
Yeah, so we started a couple weeks earlier than the States because, I mean, our proximity to like Italy and Spain, I think made it a little bit more frightening. There was a lot less ocean for it to cross. So unfortunately, like I said earlier, I'm a theater person, and I was actually stage managing a show that got postponed the day of our dress rehearsal, which
Oh no.
that sucked. Yeah, it was rough. But yeah, so I have just been leaning into my witchy roots. I'm making dandelion wine right now, which has been an adventure.
I heard the other day on a special I was watching that dandelions are considered by some to be an aphrodisiac.
Oh,
I know, right?
I'll report back when my wine's ready in like 6 months.
You're gonna get lit on dandelion
Yeah,
wine?
no. Yeah, so I've been doing that. I've read so much. I'm reading like at least a book a week.
What's the latest thing you've been reading?
Actually, that's going to factor into our story. Whoa.
Whoa, I'm so excited.
All right, so should we jump into it?
Let's do it.
All right. So today I am going to talk about the Whitechapel Club.
What is the Whitechapel Club?
So supposedly the Whitechapel Club was a secret society in Chicago.
What?
Yeah, right? So being the good Midwest girl I am, I felt like I needed to start closer to home. So the book that I've been reading is Devil in the White City by Eric Larson, which is all about the World's Fair and H.H. Holmes. But there was a lot of other crazy stuff going on in Chicago at the time.
I mean, Chicago's kind of a crazy place in general.
It is. It always has been, always will be.
But when I think of, like, secret societies, I think Washington, D.C., I think government-related, I think Princeton, I think Yale. Chicago isn't even at the top of my list.
Yeah, no. So you're in for a ride. So supposedly, in 1889, Charles Goodyear Seymour founded the Whitechapel Club with his friend Adams. I couldn't find out who Adams was, what Adams' first name was, but they were homies, so that's all that matters.
We all have that friend that goes by the last name.
Yeah, it's cool. So Seymour, I'm just going to call him Seymour, he was a journalist in Chicago. His brother Horatio once called him an odd little man, just to kind of set the tone for who we're working with here. He was a young man with such flair for what was news, with such an instinct for word values, such a rare ability as a writer, and such a quaint and original strain of humor as to make him the peer of any. So he was just this really witty, really talented young journalist in Chicago, which, I mean, Chicago was a really huge, kind of a mecca for journalism at that point. I mean, it was a big enough city, but it was still small enough that you could break in to journalism. It wasn't, New York where you have like the New York Post and the Times and all that. So he was a super versatile journalist, and he reported on any topic and was like known for having kind of an eye for the unusual. So he probably would have gotten along just fine with us. And he included this in his stories a lot. There was this one anecdote I ran into where apparently he was reporting on like some charity ball, and there was an orphan outside, and one of the rich people was like, "Get out of here," to this orphan.
Aww.
And Seymour was like, "Yeah, kid, don't you know this is the charity ball?" And was just like kind of an ass about it. He was also one of Chicago's first baseball reporters, which, I mean, knowing how Chicago treats their baseball is a huge title to bestow on anyone. And he was friends with most of the players, which gave him special insight on the coverage. They would party together. He loved going to, quote, midnight drinking parties, which same.
Yeah, we need to get together and have a midnight drinking party.
As soon as quarantine's over, man, I am so down.
And you're not in Germany anymore.
That part too. And so he loved these parties so so much that his brother Horatio, who is also a journalist, promoted him to the Chicago Herald's night editor to try and keep him away from them.
That's a good tactic.
But it didn't work because he found time to slip away
Oh.
down the alley. He was like, yeah, I'm so good at being a journalist that I'm just going to go have a drink and then I'll come back. So that didn't work super well.
Well, Ernest Hemingway always said, write drunk, edit sober, so maybe he was just kind of following that.
Yeah, I mean, totally.
Maybe that was Mark Twain. Don't quote me on that.
No, I'm pretty sure it was Ernest Hemingway because Ernest Hemingway for sure loved
Classic drinker.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So one night while he was out with his buddy Adams, probably at one of these midnight drinking parties, they were discussing the journalism club that they were going to plan on starting because there was this press club in Chicago, which was like for the elite journalists and the old fogies and, you know, it's kind of bougie. And they wanted to start their own. You know, there were these young, scrappy guys. They're really good at what they do. They don't want to hang out with these old men. And at this point, a group of newsboys, so like newsies. Yeah. They ran past shouting the news of the latest Jack the Ripper killing.
Hey!
You gonna keep going?
Come and read about the Jack the Ripper killing. It's
perfect.
I could have done better.
It was great under pressure. So at this point, Jack the Ripper was still super unidentified. And before he was given the name Jack the Ripper, he was also called the Leather Apron, but also the Whitechapel Killer, because Whitechapel was the district in London where the murders took place.
Interesting. I've never heard him referred to as that.
Yeah, well, because Jack the Ripper kind of took over once they were like, oh no, this is a thing.
I mean, it's catchy.
It is.
He got branded.
Yeah. And so Seymour was like, oh man, I'm so for real gonna call it the Whitechapel Club. And Adams was like, yeah, bro, let's do it. And so the Whitechapel Club was formed. They named Jack the Ripper the absentee president of the club.
Because that's who you want as the president of your club, a serial killer ripping and mutilating prostitutes.
Actually, yes. Let's keep going.
Oh, man.
So like I said, the Whitechapel Club may supposedly have started as kind of a response to the fracture between the more esteemed journalism society that was the Press Club of Chicago. And it was said that the Whitechapel Club, in contrast, was young with hope and it was bizarre.
And also made full of a couple of fanboys for Jack the Ripper.
Which, are we that much better considering that we're starting a whole podcast about that kind of stuff?
Yeah, but we're not starting a club.
That's true.
Maybe not. Maybe these are our people. Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of this story, I'm going to warn you, is highly problematic, and there's a lot of it that I'm kind of on board with. So, okay. So because of the odd hours that journalists worked at this time, these type of clubs were super popular, and it was customary for there to be like a sense of brotherhood among journalists. They often lived together, and they were considered like these bohemians, which, I mean, it made sense because they had to, I mean, there wasn't computers. They couldn't just like talk into their recorder and then be like, oh, okay, whatever. So they worked crazy hours, so a lot of them didn't have like friends that weren't journalists or girlfriends or wives or whatever, because they're like, I'm married to the job. So these clubs were kind of a place for them to socialize and have some camaraderie. So the Whitechapel Club was actually formally recognized by the state of Illinois, and on the certificate of incorporation, the official purpose was stated as social reform, which was probably tongue-in-cheek humor.
All right.
The men of the club were young rebels who were basically like dissatisfied with the political and business practices of their time. So like that part I'm super on board with.
Okay, fair.
I don't want to hang out with curmudgeon-y old men either. Like, I'm kind of rebellious myself, so yeah, like, you're the man. So the papers that they worked for all were maybe considered a little bit more gossipy than some of the others. They covered like all the murders, which Chicago was super notorious for, as well as the news of like heiresses eloping and just like kind of the, you know, the
societal pages.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And so the views of these journalists were probably kind of influenced by all the murders and tragedies they had to report on, because there was never a waste of ink. There was always something shady happening in Chicago.
There still is.
I mean, yeah. At least it doesn't all smell like Stockyard now, though. I mean, that's progress.
Some areas do. Go on. No hate to my Chicago peeps.
What is it? 314 St. Louis. I don't know. I'm from Kansas City. So the Whitechapel Club's headquarters were located in a loop alley, now West Calhoun Place, between Wells and LaSalle. I looked it up. It's a parking garage with a coffee house now. So, I mean, if you want a takeaway latte where these guys used to hang out,
there's your place.
there you go. So over half of the members were journalists, but they let in men from other professions, but only 2 men from each other profession could belong at the same time.
So you wouldn't want 2 tax accountants. Or more than 2 tax accountants.
Yeah, you could have 2 tax accountants.
But not 3.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
They wanted to keep it mostly journalist-oriented. But, you know, sometimes you get bored of hearing each other's stories and you want something else.
Or you have a buddy, you want to liven it up. Or you need a lawyer to do you some favors.
Exactly. And so of these other professions, men were included that were bank presidents, police chiefs, preachers, which was kind of surprising.
That is surprising.
Magicians, psychics, and convicted murderers.
Well, who doesn't like a good magician?
I do know you're fond of magicians.
Which is sketchier, though, the magician or the convicted murderers?
Considering that convicted murderers have been found out and a good magician is never found out, I feel like I'm more likely to trust the guy who I know what's happening.
Fair. I think that's a really good point. Dude, I love magicians. I know, that's so weird. I am so fascinated. I think it's such a craft, and I just turn into a child every time I see one.
It is really cool. It is really cool.
It's really cool, but there are not a lot of attractive magicians.
Or, like, balanced, stable ones.
Which same could be said with the convicted murderers about the balance.
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
Go on.
So basically, anyone who was anti-establishment was invited to join, but joining wasn't necessarily easy. According to their bylaws, there could only be 51 members at a time, but there were usually no more than 40 because of how intense their screening process was.
Really? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say that so far, this feels like kind of a club to solve murders. You've got the people that have been convicted of murder, so they're on the inside. They know kind of how to commit it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
You've got the psychics who can communicate with the people who have been murdered. You've got the journalists who want to report on the stories. You've got the reverends who can keep out the demons. You've got the magicians who can, I guess, keep you entertained during the breaks. And you have the police chief who's investigating the crimes as well. It sounds like a really well-rounded out club here.
Cool. Well, I'm going to go write that down because that's obviously going to be my next novel.
I love it.
It'll be like the Hardy Boys, but grittier.
So in.
Yes.
Please send me drafts of that.
Okay. So sometimes, though, even despite this really intense screening process, sometimes they were known to let men in for bizarre reasons. And I just want to share a couple of those with you.
Please.
A man was admitted because he'd never been known to pay a debt.
Okay, so he's kind of like a con artist.
Yeah.
So maybe the police chief needed some con artist expertise, so they let this guy go. Okay, cool.
There you go.
Yeah,
another man because he'd never been known to smile.
That's Jeff. He doesn't smile. We like him.
Yeah, basically. Among qualifications were wit and good fellowship, which sounds like the start of a Hobbit journey. I feel like Gandalf's just rounding people up in Chicago.
Hey, you heard about Jack the Ripper? Come on!
Smokes pipe.
Journalism!
So at least 3 members had to vouch for someone that had wit and good fellowship. So if you couldn't get 3 people on your side, sucks to suck, you're not getting in, buddy.
I just realized my Gandalf was terrible.
I love your Gandalf. He sounds a little cracked out, but it's Chicago in the 1880s, so...
He's going to change from episode to episode.
Oh, he's coming back. I love it.
He fits the scenarios.
He really does. He really does. So once accepted, there was a probationary month where the candidate was encouraged to spend 5 nights a week at the club.
I'm sure the wives loved that.
Well, like I said, they worked so much that, like, they didn't have healthy marriages anyways, so just hang out with your friends.
Certainly not unsmiley Jeff.
No. Probably nor the guy who couldn't pay his debts. Wives don't really love creditors banging on the door.
Yeah, but you couldn't really get out of a marriage then.
That's true. And so they were, supposed to kind of get to know the members as well as get to know their antics. During this time, so they had a bulletin board, and during this probationary month, the guy's name would be, like, written up on the bulletin board. And at any time, if one of the members decided they don't like this guy, they could just tear it down and the candidacy, like, sucks to suck. You're just for sure not getting in.
That's pretty brutal.
Yeah.
Okay.
So membership was so coveted that in later years, some guests actually lied and said that they were full members. So, like, sometimes guests would be invited, like, to come hang out. And I'll get into some of who those guests were in a little bit. Their motto was to laugh in the face of death.
A lot of those people do that, except for Jeff.
Yeah.
I assume Jeff doesn't laugh.
Ha ha ha.
Ha.
Yeah. So, like I said, I've been reading Devil in the White City, and that's where I found out about the club. I just wanted to read you a quick paragraph from the book. It's really well written. Anyone who hasn't read it, absolutely check it out. It's a little dense. I've learned a lot about architecture and landscaping.
Okay.
But it's a really good read. So, one telegraph boy made his way through the dark and unlit alley that smelled of rotted fruit and was silent save for the receding hiss of gas lights on the street he had left behind. He found a door, knocked, and entered a room full of men, some young, some old, all seeming to speak at once, a few quite drunk. A coffin at the center of the room served as a bar. The light was dim and came from gas jets hidden behind skulls mounted on the walls. Other skulls lay scattered about the room. A hangman's noose dangled from the wall, as did assorted weapons and a blanket caked with blood. So obviously I read that passage and was like, hold on, what?
Yeah, what is this place?
And then I did a lot of Googling, and you're like, hey, you want to start a podcast? And I was like, boy, do I. I have just the thing. So the headquarters were kind of like downtown at the time, and they were located behind the offices of the Herald, the Examiner, and the Times. So it was super convenient for these guys to just, get off their journalism shift and pop over. So the door was heavy oak stained with a glass inset of a skull and crossbones with the quote, I too have lived in Arcadia, which is kind of mysterious, but it's a translation from Latin, which more or less means I, and in this case, I refers to death, am in Arcadia, which was like a pastoral, idyllic place, like a utopia. So it's basically a memento mori situation. It's like, remember that even in, your finest, happiest places, death still exists. So kind of like that passage said, the walls were decorated with some crazy shit. Guns and knives used as murder weapons, which were donated by the police.
That's sketchy at best. Were they solved cases at least that they donated the murder weapons of? Or are they just like, hey, I found this in the river covered in blood?
I mean, who knows?
Stick it in the clubhouse.
A bloody slipper belonging to a Chinese merchant killed by a streetcar in San Francisco was nailed to the wall.
Ouch.
Yeah, it gets worse. We're getting worse right here. A blood-stained shirt from a Native American killed during the Battle of Wounded Knee.
So they're also collecting murder souvenirs of different races, which is kind of
whoever they can, yeah.
Best just cringy.
Yeah. Pieces of fire engines destroyed in the Great Fire. Pictures of, Chinese pirates before and after being beheaded.
Ew.
And also, this is the 1880s, so pictures weren't just, on your iPhone.
No.
You had to really want a picture.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was rumored to be a boot of a soldier from Custer's battle on the mantle, which was said to still have the bones inside. A noose dangled from the ceiling. Super cringy.
Yeah, but I mean, I feel like that probably could have not been used just as well,
Yeah.
You can tie a noose and hang it up and be like, it's a noose.
Yeah, but I feel like we're that close to the Civil War, it means worse things.
Oh, yeah. Very good point.
There's some of this that I'm super on board with, like furniture built out of coffins. Sounds kind of
so far they do sound quite a bit racist.
Yeah, there's a lot of racism and just problematic stuff happening. I'm super into the skull and crossbone and coffin aesthetic.
Yeah.
But the cringy other culture part seems like not a good plan. So they drank out of goblets made from human skulls.
Okay.
These skulls were from sex workers, and they had a special goblet for guests, which was the skull of Waterford Jane, called Queen of the Sands, which referred to the red light district in Chicago, which she was a prominent figure. And that skull goblet was completely lined with silver.
I'm guessing that they also got these skull goblets from the police.
No, funny you should ask. So these skulls were provided by John C. Spray, who was the asylum superintendent.
And collector of skulls.
Yeah, well, so, I mean, an asylum in the 1880s, anyone could go to an asylum for anything, and women who didn't have husbands or fathers or whatever could just be picked up off the street.
Well, and I'm wondering with the sex worker thing, a lot of these asylums would also host people that were experiencing health conditions. So I know syphilis was running rampant at that time. That
Yeah.
would, attack the brain after a while. So I'm
Mhm.
wondering if there's a link there.
Yeah, well, and I mean, unfortunately, it's a pretty well spread out fact in Chicago that a lot of the women who worked in the sands were murdered pretty brutally. And so finding these bodies, finding these skulls was relatively easy. And I mean, this is also during the time where a lot of grave robbing was happening for science and medical doctors studying. Like, prominent medical schools would go and raid cemeteries. So
One of the easier eras in our history to get human remains.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Have you heard the Pirates of the Caribbean conspiracy?
No.
So the Pirates of the Caribbean ride at Disney, apparently when it was built, there was still no legality on how human remains could be used, and some of the skeletons that were used and featured on the ride were actually human remains, and there's said to still be one.
Interesting. We
Yeah.
should do a Disney deep dive at some point.
Oh, heck yeah.
A lot of folklore there.
Absolutely. So in addition to the goblets, gas lights were also made from the skulls by the club's, get this, decorator/chaplain.
A man of many skills.
And his name was, I'm gonna butcher this because my Greek is not great, Chrysostom Tombstone Thompson. And so to do this, he would saw the tops off of skulls and then fitted the eye holes with glass to make light fixtures, which if they weren't real skulls, I would be super on board with. That sounds so dope. The actual human part is the turnoff for me.
I'd love to see a picture of one of these.
Right, yeah. And then, so upstairs where meetings took place, there was a coffin-shaped dining table that had brass nails driven into it with the names of each member.
Oh.
So each guy was another nail in the coffin.
That's kind of a fun initiation.
It's kind of cute. And so I'm glad that you had that little laugh because we're done being happy. We're going to talk about some more cultural appropriation.
Oh, no. Okay.
So also upstairs, there were reportedly, or supposedly, many Native American artifacts, supposedly blood-stained blankets, and ghost shirts. So ghost shirts were shirts that were blessed by medicine men to protect against U.S. cavalry bullets. There were also tomahawks, axes, war bonnets, bows, and arrows. So, yep, not great. They had guests sometimes. So in addition to drinking out of the goblet of Waterford Jane's skull, guests also had to stand up and tell stories, later called a competitive telling of lies, while holding a sword, which a wagon driver used to kill his wife.
I don't even know where to start with that. Okay, so a wagon driver killed his wife, and then with the sword.
Yeah.
Does he just drive around with a sword just in case? It seems like an impractical weapon for that era in Chicago, unless it was an ancient artifact.
Yeah.
But then again, when we're talking about swords, we can talk about sabers that were used in the Civil War. Like, what constitutes as a sword?
I don't know, but I mean, if you're gonna kill someone, which we obviously don't condone, a
No,
sword's a
please
pretty
don't.
dope way to do it.
Only if the other person's armed.
Well, yes, but I mean, it's way cooler sounding than just your random Chicago shooting.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, especially for these journalist guys, they're like, oh wow, I get to write about a sword killing today.
That would spice up the news pool.
It would. So to make the sword even cooler, in some other accounts that I read, it was also called a Templar sword.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair. Unless they're referring to a Templar sword as the style of sword, which I can assume would be like a long sword.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what the sword's deal was, but
I think we got way off track with the sword to begin with. We like
did.
swords.
Swords are cool. So the act of getting up and telling these stories while brandishing a sword and drinking out of a silver-lined skull was called the chestnut roast or sharpshooting. And during the storytelling, other members would heckle and interrupt the speaker. So just be bawdy and loud and raucous. So the club had some really notorious guests, including two men who would go on to become president.
Ooh, can I guess?
Yes, please guess.
Okay, can I guess? I'm gonna guess, but I'm very bad at dates.
Okay, so we're in the 1880s, so we're post-Civil War.
Right.
Yep. Roaring 20s, Great Depression.
I'm still gonna get a lot of this wrong. Hoover?
Nope.
Okay.
Who's the most buck-wild? Which one?
Freddie. Franklin D.
Freddie. Teddy.
Teddy.
There you go. Teddy Roosevelt.
Teddy Roosevelt.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, and all right. Well, let's just go with Teddy.
Okay, so Teddy
I'm sure
Roosevelt.
some people called him Freddie.
Okay. I thought it'd be like Frankie. So Teddy and William McKinley, who I had to Google because I was like, wait, which one is that? He got assassinated, and yeah. So they were both guests, as well as a lot of writers, even some international boxing champions. So at least 2 of our presidents have drunk out of a silver-lined sex worker's skull goblet, which makes me
That's
feel
good to know.
a certain way about how our politics are run.
Well, one of them got assassinated.
Yeah.
Karma.
So this was a kind of funny story. One night while hosting another club from Philadelphia, at 2 a.m., there was pounding on the door, and the cops rushed in with their billy clubs drawn. Seymour, so our good buddy who started the club, shouted, "My God, the cops are raiding us again!" while his buddy Adams stood on his armchair and heckled the police as they arrested the guests and hauled them off in wagons. The police drove these guests around for half an hour before letting them in on the practical joke.
Yeah, because the cops were part of the club.
Yep.
Okay, that's a pretty great initiation.
This was not the only time this happened. This wasn't an initiation. These are their guests. These are just randos from Philly. And then Seymour's like, "Oh my God, the cops are here."
That's incredible.
It was awesome.
Why would you not mess with your friends like that, though, if you had the opportunity?
I mean, because you all know that you're talking to the police chief.
True, some might not know that he's a member.
Yeah, I guess that's true. But I mean, it's usually like less than 40 people. So I feel like you can keep track of 40 guys. So
I can't. Like, if I'm in a room with 40 people that I'm just meeting for the first time, and maybe let's say I know like 4 that invited me to this thing,
yeah,
I don't know who Jim Bob, the chief of police, is, unless he's in uniform.
This is fair. This is fair. So potentially the most important guest that the club ever hosted was the belly dancer mononymously known as Omeen. She's the reason that we have a lot of information about the club that we do. So I'm going to send you a picture of Miss Omeen.
Are they going to take her skull?
No, her skull's fine.
Okay, cool.
Let me send this to you because she was a pretty dope lady. I'm also going to send you a picture of the club.
Ooh, it came through. All right. Oh, look at her healthy body image.
Right?
Yeah. When you said belly dancer, I was expecting a very slight, thin woman with great abs. And this girl is just an average girl. I love it.
Anyway, she was the only woman ever invited to the club in its entire existence. And she was invited for dinner and a coffin dance, which I'm guessing means that she performed her routine on the coffin-shaped table, or maybe she like popped out of a coffin. Either way, I'm totally in.
Dealer's choice.
Yeah, she was sworn to secrecy, but she did give an interview with the San Francisco Morning Call.
Those guys obviously weren't involved in the club, otherwise they would have put a nix on that.
Oh, for sure. Well, because they were in San Francisco. She went all the way out to California before giving an interview. The members gave her an urn with human remains in it.
Did they tell her whose?
So we'll actually circle back to that after talking a little bit about Omeen, just because she's kind of a bad bitch and deserves her moment.
Yeah, hell yeah.
So she was the first person to bring belly dance, or danse du vent, to the American stage and would end up performing at the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago while H.H. Holmes was doing his atrocities. So belly dancing was super taboo because of the style as well as the lack of corset worn by the performer.
Ooh,
I know. And the name devolved, so the French name, the danse du vent, which I'm sure people are going to tell me my French sucks. It does. Devolved into hoochie coochie or coochie coochie. So I, while doing my notes, definitely listened to Lady Marmalade.
Who's the one who used to say coochie coochie? Who's that?
Charo.
Charo!
Yeah, Charo. She made a video about how to wash your hands, and it was adorable.
Maybe we should share that on our Facebook.
Yes. Just, people need to know. It's important. Hygiene's good. So Omeen became popular in the States in 1889, so the same year that the club was founded, along with the Japanese illusionist Sinkholes. She considered her dance as a more higher art form than the typical popular midway burlesque, because she was actually raised in a culture that performed belly dancing. So she claimed that she was born in Istanbul to a Turkish army officer father, and her mom was a professional belly dancer who taught her how to dance when she was 8. When she was 12, this is super cringy, she was married off to an English army officer who took her to Egypt, where they had a daughter named Nadine, and then he abandoned them.
Of course, because what else are you going to do with a child bride? What a jerk.
Yeah, and so then she and her daughter moved to London, where she started performing, and she met and fell in love with young Ko, who brought them to America. Omin was said to have many romantic relationships. She was pretty on again, off again with young Ko, and even actually got him imprisoned for a while because she said that he stole some of her costumes. So he had to go to jail for a little bit and cool off, and she got her costumes back.
Yeah, but what was he doing with the costumes?
I don't know. I mean, he was an illusionist. Maybe he just made him disappear.
Magicians, can't trust them.
So she was said to have many romantic relationships and actually apparently got tangled up with a marquis for a while.
Oh.
And then so he actually said that she was stealing from him some like fancy jewels and, rich people stuff. And she spun it to the cops and was like, oh, no, darling. Remember, you gave those to me as your betrothal because we're going to get married. And so it was like super cringy.
And did he say no?
I mean, it was like a blurb, like one sentence, but she dabbled in all areas of society. Pretty on again, off again in her relationships. And so there's some scandal that her backstory may be fabricated due to some court records where maybe her name isn't what she said it is, and maybe she's not from where she says she is. But she's super cool, so I'm going to let her do her thing.
Fair.
Yeah. So you asked earlier about the urn.
Yeah, whose remains did they give her?
So they gave her the remains of Morris Allen Collins, who was the president of the Dallas, Texas Suicide Club, which was probably a pretty similar entity to the Whitechapel Club, which was also sometimes referred to as a suicide club. I think it's just like them trying to be super punk rock, but he offered his body to the Whitechapel Club for a ritual cremation and then did shoot himself in the head. So maybe they took their suicide club more seriously. Not sure.
Which, if you are experiencing suicidal thoughts or anything like that, please seek help. Please.
Absolutely. There are people who
do not join any sort of death club like this. We do not condone that.
Nope, not at all.
Okay.
Mental health is real. Fight the stigma. If you need help, get help. If you can't make your own, Happy Chemicals store-bought is fine. Okay, so Mr. Collins' body was taken up to Chicago, and a pyre was constructed with the help of 8 farmhands who were hired, and it was 20 feet long by 18 feet wide and 100 feet tall.
It's a big pyre.
It's a big pyre. It was made of driftwood, cordwood, and was doused in kerosene, and it cost $500 to construct, which is today's equivalent of $14,000.
That's a lot of money to spend on burning some guy for a ritual, but I guess they had it.
Well, so actually, they got it paid for by the Herald publisher. They asked one of the big CEOs, because big money's always been big money, down with capitalism, eat the rich. So,
hey, we want to build this pyre. It's going to be the equivalent of like $500. You cool with that, bro? Oh, yeah, I got you.
For sure.
Go burn a guy.
Oh, darn, this so mean belly dancer stole all my money.
We need a gift for this belly dancer. Wanted to get her something special, thought cremate this guy.
Yeah. So on July 16th, 1892, at 10:50 p.m., very specific, the cremation took place at the Indiana sand dunes, which, fun fact, I've actually been to.
Okay.
It's just sand.
It sounds like sand.
Yeah, it's sand that sometimes is piled up really high and sometimes it isn't.
Sand in Indiana.
Sandiana. On the shore of Lake Michigan. So the members dressed Collins's body in a white robe. They circled the pyre 3 times while carrying torches and singing a dirge. Dwight Baldwin, a missionary and medical doctor, gave the sermon. The harp and zither, it's like the
musical instrument.
Yeah, okay. It's guitar looking, sounds like a harp kind of, whatever. So they played Ernst's elegy and they sang and recited poetry. The ceremony lasted until morning, at which point the ashes were gathered and brought back to the club's headquarters. It was said the fire burned so hot that the sand beneath like vitrified, so it like started to turn into glass.
Which would be a cool souvenir in itself if that's what
I would prefer to have glass from the pyre as opposed to just the urn.
I wouldn't want the cremated remains of some guy. Oh, hey, thanks. I'm going to put it on my mantle and he's going to haunt me. Cool.
Well, like, it's weird. I don't know. Ashes in general are strange because you're like, do I display them? Do I not? Like, because everyone knows what's going on and it's like, oh, hey, thank you for coming to my home. This is my uncle. Like, it
This is
brings the
some
party
guy I
down.
got at a meeting once.
Yeah, like even when you know the dude, it's like, oh, I don't know. Anyways, so the ashes were all gathered up and brought back to the club's headquarters and made into a tradition where the members had to like sift their hands through the powdery remains.
Hygienic.
Yeah, not my idea of a good time. And then some of the ashes were given to Omin in this urn.
So I once was in a film where I had to scatter my loved one's ashes,
Mm-hmm.
but it's the first time I had ever interacted with the ashes
Oh, okay.
as an actor, or just a person in general.
Mhm.
Most of my family's been buried, so I didn't know how that goes. So I poured a little in my hand and I sprinkled it out, and they were like, no, that's not, you don't touch the ashes. That's not a thing. They made it a thing.
Yeah, no, they definitely did. My quick little anecdote about ashes is my cousin lost her husband a few years ago and wanted to spread some of his ashes in one of their favorite places. And so we were all down on vacation together. I went with her because she has some little kids and, you know, she needed some help wrangling. So we went to this spot and her and the kids had this lovely moment. It was great. And she had this little, you know, Ziploc baggie full of the ashes because you don't want to take, I mean, people underestimate, you think, oh, I'm going to get some ashes. It's like 20 pounds of ash. Like
That's a lot of ashes.
It's a substantial amount. And so we just took like a little Ziploc sandwich baggie. And so I'm washing our clothes. We're getting ready to pack up and go home from this trip. So my cousin did not empty her pockets.
Oh no.
And I'm like, I'm about to move the laundry into the dryer. And there's just this gritty gray waterlogged Ziploc bag at the bottom.
Oh, did you wash the clothes with ashes?
And it takes me a minute. And I go into the other room and I just hold the bag up and I'm like, we washed your husband. And she just starts guffawing and she's like, well, he has been dead for like 7 months. He was getting stinky.
Oh.
Yeah, so we washed her husband. Anywho, so back to the club. The purpose of the club was once called Steady and Serious Newspaper Gossip. So they clearly, I mean, they were just there to have fun. They didn't really take themselves too seriously. The members would often sit in their armchairs, feet on the table or up the wall, pipe smoking, and rehash their recent stories and kind of criticize each other's work. So, I mean, it was like any kind of fraternity, society, or fun fact, there was no gambling for money allowed in the club. So all dice and card games ended in drinks. Like the loser would have to buy the next round.
That's fun.
Yeah. The macabre sense was probably kind of just a fact of life. Like I said, Chicago was pretty crime-laden. Smell of gore wafted throughout the city from the stockyards. There were frequent outbreaks of cholera from dirty drinking water. Crime was a really frequent occurrence. I mean, at this point, police work was still more about catching bad guys than actually preventing crimes. I always like go back to the John Mulaney bit where he's like, what should we do with all this blood? Ew, clean it up. It's like there was no DNA. I mean, it was just like, oh, a dead body. That sucks. There wasn't DNA or fingerprints or, you know, it was just like, ew.
Well, I think fingerprinting might have been around a little bit then, I want to say.
But I don't think they had a database. They're like, cool, fingerprints. Like, if someone else touches this thing, I'll know. But, like...
I'm going to find out when fingerprinting happened.
Was that, like, the 2002 You've Got Mail?
That's my email notification.
I love it!
Fingerprinting was first used in 1892, so actually, not quite when this was going on.
So right around then, though. So the men in the club were confronted with all of this every day. They were raised in a city which 18 years before suffered in the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, which killed 300 people and left 100,000 people homeless, which in a city of 324,000 was, I mean, that's a lot of people.
That is a lot of people.
And most of these guys, I mean, it was 18 years earlier, so they were probably alive for it and probably impacted by it. These guys were probably also raised by men who fought in Civil War or had fathers who died in it, or, you know, had fathers or grandfathers which were part of the group of oppressors on the Trail of Tears. This era was like rife with so much bloodshed and loss. The average life expectancy was somewhere in your 40s, so it kind of seems like the club taunting death and like all the artifacts gave them a way to cope, since like psychology wasn't a thing. And like,
yeah, I could see that.
Stigmas were, so they're just like, oh, haha, I laugh in the face of death. So I guess it's like the club kind of gave them a way to grapple with their humanity. They were able to kind of share in this camaraderie of being faced with death. Since every day, their whole job is to just report on death. They're like all so intimately acquainted with seeing these bodies and, knowing that there's no hope and that it was just as likely to be their family or themselves getting killed.
That's very bleak.
It is very bleak. So, this club probably gave them a way to address that, even though they didn't have the words to use. As we entered the beginning of the end, in 1892, the Whitechapel Club moved to a larger space at 173 Calhoun Place. The members dressed in black robes and had a procession from the old clubhouse to the new one. When they arrived, they fired rockets, which I have no idea what that means, and they broke a bottle of champagne over the threshold. The new clubhouse door had a stained glass inset of a raven perched on a pen, and I want it. That is 100% my aesthetic. So when the club moved, each member had to pay dues of $5, about equivalent to $140 now. But the upkeep of the new, more expensive building soon landed them in debt, so they had to start accepting more wealthy members, and eventually the mix was less than 50% journalists. And so that was like their huge thing in the beginning was like, it's journalists, so we can only have 2 guys of each.
And then it ends up being, it's money.
Yeah, like most things, and so it kind of fell apart because of that. In 1921, the club was officially removed from county records, but it had been officially defunct since somewhere between 1894 and 1897. Judge Collins said of the Whitechapel Club, more true wit and humor could be found there in one night than circumnavigation of the world would give. I have always considered myself fortunate in having had the privilege of seeing greatness in the making.
Oh, that's kind of a nice thing for him to say about him.
And so that is the story of the Whitechapel Club. So really quick, I do just want to cite my sources. I talked about The Devil in the White City by Eric Larson, ChicagoMag.com, SteampunkChicago.com, and Casebook.org were all super helpful. So yeah, that's the Whitechapel Club.
Man, a pretty good deep dive there.
I got super into it. I kind of like, I don't know, do you watch Always Sunny in Philadelphia?
Of course.
Okay, the post room scene where Charlie's like smoking and he's like got the wall with the post-its and he's like, I'm so close.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I was that.
That's amazing.
Welcome to Mysteries and Mayhem!
Trying to find a good segue here from yours to mine. So we're gonna go from secret societies to sinkholes.
Ooh.
Ooh. Okay, so sinkholes are created when water erodes the bedrock underground over time, and the added weight of sometimes above ground buildings can cause the ground to collapse, creating massive holes that are sometimes hundreds of feet deep. They just open up sometimes immediately and sometimes slowly over time. But there have been lots of cases of a sinkhole developing and boom, your house is gone, you're asleep in your bed, and you are dead.
I remember it was there was a big issue in like Guatemala a few years ago, right?
There are sinkholes on every single continent.
Oh, dang, okay.
Including the deepest sinkhole, which is over 1,000 feet deep, and that's actually in the ocean. A sinkhole develops when water erosion causes the bedrock below to erode. So think of you've got a whole cheese, and then all of a sudden you've got the Swiss cheese. Well, the weight of buildings and things above it, and bedrock and ground above it, causes it to collapse. Okay. So even if you try to fill in a sinkhole, you're filling it in on insufficient bedrock that's just wholly and scattered. So the dirt just falls down and would cause more weight and more of a collapse. Now, there are 3 different types of sinkholes, but I'm not going to bore you guys with that stuff because I want to get to the meat of this story. And that is the mythology and haunting behind sinkholes.
What?
Yeah. So in medieval times, sinkholes were often referred to as hellholes. And there was a belief that hell was opening to swallow and punish those above for sinning. Because I assume when you're in the Middle Ages and the ground just gives way and lots of people die and your buildings collapse, you have to find a way to define that. So it's a hellhole.
I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah. Where there are sinkholes, there are death, and where there is death, there is often hauntings. So I want to talk about some haunted sinkholes.
Yes, I've never actually heard of, I've heard of sinkholes, but I didn't realize that there was such an affiliation between ghosts and sinkholes.
Oh, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons I definitely wanted to do sinkhole hauntings, because, I listen to a ton of paranormal podcasts. I watch a ton of shows on paranormal activity and things, and I've never really heard sinkhole ghosts be discussed before.
Yeah.
So I wanted wanted to bring you something kind of out of left field. So let me take you to Mexico, to the Yucatan Peninsula. In Mexico, they refer to sinkholes as cenotes.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And sometimes in Mexico and other places where sinkholes exist, the sinkholes can connect to underground caverns or caves as well, which is the case with this particular sinkhole I'm going to talk about, that for years was rumored to be haunted. So explorers from National Geographic were sent down to patrol and see what was happening under this cenote. And they found that this cenote had lots of chambers that were just littered with human remains.
Okay.
All sorts of ancient bones. So the bones were believed to be a mass burial of epidemic victims. I'm sorry to touch on that if it's a little too timely for you guys.
Yeah.
But it's located in the modern-day city of Mérida and was once positioned outside of the ancient Mayan city of Mayapan, which I'm probably pronouncing terribly wrong. But that's not the only haunted sinkhole that there is. There have been reports about haunted sinkholes in Kansas.
What?
All over. Yeah. But most
crap.
importantly, there's a lot of sinkholes in Florida.
Florida man.
Which brings me to the story I'm going to tell you guys today.
Right on. Yeah, no, I kind of knew about like the cenotes because the Lost City, like where Mexico City was originally built, that was a sinkhole or had something to do with a sinkhole, and it's been like built over, because I remember learning about that. But they of course did not talk about the ghosts.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of bodies that have been found all over these cenotes, and there are a lot of hauntings that go along with that. But it's more of a well-known haunted sinkhole cave system, and I wanted to bring you guys something that isn't as well known. All right, I'm going to talk to you guys about the ghost of Lime Sink in Chipley, Florida.
All right, I'm here for it.
Okay, so this took place in the year 1890, late May or early June. There's been
So we're
some
like in the same time frame. The Whitechapel Club was formed in 1889.
19 years apart. Oh, wait, no, 1 year apart.
Like 6 months apart.
6 months apart. How crazy is that we chose something from the same...
We didn't plan that. That's just...
No.
That's bonkers.
So this man named Angus McMillan owned a bunch of land. He was a Civil War hero, and there was this sinkhole with water in it on his property. Well, his daughter, Netta McMillan, who was 18 years old, and Graymore Pridgeon, one of her friends, 15, and another one of their friends, Nanny Calloway, decided one day that they were going to go wade into this sinkhole. Well, the father of Netta McMillan, so Angus, warned his daughter that it's a really dangerous place. You shouldn't go down there. Don't be around there. Not a great idea.
At any point and like cause like a riptide almost?
Absolutely.
Okay.
At any point in time, a sinkhole can get larger, can fall deeper, do both. It's a really bad place to just be hanging out, especially if you're young girls. Not really paying attention to what you're doing.
Definitely.
So Netta and her friend Graymore and Nanny go down to the sinkhole, and they decide to wade into the shallow end because none of them can swim. The sinkhole gives way.
Okay, that's an even worse idea. If you know you can't swim, don't play in sinkholes.
It's a terrible plan.
Don't play in a sinkhole.
So the sinkhole gives way, and the girls are immediately pushed into deeper water, and they start screaming and crying for help. Jeff McMillan, Netta's brother and Angus's son, Jeff rushes to the sinkhole in an attempt to save his sister and her friends. He's able to pull out Graymore Pridgeon, the 15-year-old, but is unable to find Netta or Nanny Calloway. So he runs to town, and he gathers some people to come help him. And many of the people from the town arrive, and they construct kind of crude instruments, poles with hooks on it, grappling hooks, to try to find these girls and pull them out of the water. But it's too late.
Awesome.
So Reverend F.C. Hawk is quoted in a 1963 article as talking about the incident. He was actually one of Nanny Calloway's childhood sweethearts, and one of the first on the scene. He's quoted as saying, "I was among the first to get there. A man whose name I have forgotten, grappling with a long sliced out pole with a hook on the end, was able to hook her dress and pulled the body out." So they were able to find Nanny Calloway's body, and they pull her out of the water with this grappling hook. And they pull her out at 9 p.m., so a lot of time has gone by before they find her body. But Netta McMillan, the daughter of Angus McMillan, whose land this is on, is lost collapsed, and they have not been able to recover her body at this
So
point.
hold on. So when did they fall in?
They fell in, I couldn't find an exact time, but it was earlier in the day. So
So, like,
definitely during
okay.
daylight.
So they were like a couple hours. Dang, that's awful.
Yeah, so at 9 p.m., this guy rigs up a hook and is finally able to hook Nanny Calloway's dress and pull the body onto shore. For up to a week after, attempts were made to recover Netta's body, and they were completely and utterly unsuccessful. A deep water diver was even brought in from Pensacola, who explored the entire bottom of the sink, except for where they had went down, which is a really weird thing because, I mean, if you're trying to find a body, wouldn't you go where they were last kind of seen?
Well, I mean, were they trying to do some kind of weird like geometry on like the velocity of the move from when the bottom fell?
No,
Like,
he was just afraid to go where they were.
Oh, okay. Well,
So
that's
he
different.
checked the rest of the sink.
I was trying to give him like benefit of the doubt and make it all, math and smart, but okay, he's just.
But I get it, the logistics of being where the sinkhole just collapsed, and they had kind of checked that area already. Perhaps he thought it was safest to check the rest of the area. So it's believed that this sinkhole has some underground caves and caverns to it. And they thought, well, maybe her body could have gone there, just kind of got sucked in when the sinkhole collapsed. Later, they brought in a pump to pump out all the water in the sinkhole to retrieve her body, and that also failed. They were not able to recover her body.
So she's like gone, like just vanished.
Gone. 18-year-old Netta McMillan disappeared. Her body to this day has yet to be found.
Whoa.
Shortly after, people started reporting apparitions on the sinkhole. They see a mist-like figure of a woman who will hover above the sinkhole or walk on the water and gradually disappear. It only happens on foggy and dark nights.
Okay, so some like La Llorona vibes?
Yeah, a little bit of a La Llorona vibe. So residents through Chipley have been reportedly seeing this apparition since her disappearance in 1890. And the story is still told in Chipley, Florida today.
Really? Whoa.
Yes. The sinkhole is now on private land, so I don't advocate for anyone to go to the sinkhole and try to find her. No trespassing. Also, keep in mind it is a dangerous sinkhole, and unless you want to end up like Netta McMillan, sinkholes are not to be messed with. So that is my story of the Chipley, Florida sinkhole ghost.
Very
Netta
nice.
McMillan. Thank you. I tried to keep this one a little short because I knew you were going on a bit more of a deep dive.
Yeah.
But I highly recommend everybody checks out some sinkhole hauntings because there are a lot of great ones out there, and maybe I'll bring you guys another one in the future.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, it makes total sense once you mentioned it, but I had never even thought to combine those or to think of that as being a particularly haunted space. I mean, I know that they're tragic because obviously, whole buildings get lost and people get swallowed up in them, but I never would have thought about ghosts being associated. So
oh my gosh, there's a lot of tragedy, but there's also been a lot of discovery due to sinkholes. In fact, there was a sinkhole in Florida that took place on a golf course that ended up revealing some underground caverns with discoveries of saber-toothed tiger remains.
Oh, wow.
A lot of archaeological discoveries in paleontological. How do you what's the plural for that?
Paleontologic?
Paleontologic and paleontology discoveries have taken place in sinkholes.
A lot of dinos down there.
A lot of dinos, a lot of fossils, a lot of civilizations.
Some Little Mermaid vibes.
All sorts of good sinkhole stuff. Okay, so Rue, I have a nope of the week for you.
All right, I'm ready.
It's a 40-foot long snake from up to 58 to 60 million years ago called the Titanoboa. And I'm just going to show you the picture right now.
Okay.
What do you think?
So I really like snakes, but I still don't think I want to encounter a 60 million year old one. So it's a hardcore nope.
I'm going to say nope.
It makes me think of the freaking A Series of Unfortunate Events. Do you remember the uncle that was like the herpetologist, the snake dude?
No.
Oh, okay. So like back me up here, listeners. So all the kids in the Series of Unfortunate Events like go stay with their uncle. I think it's Uncle Monty, and he's a snake scientist. I think it's a herpetologist, and they all have fun with these snakes or whatever. And of course, Count Olaf does his nefarious stuff. But there's this one scene in the movie where the baby Sonny is like playing with this huge snake, and that's totally what that makes me think of.
It makes me think of a basilisk from Harry Potter.
Yeah, same. It's big time Nagini vibes.
Either way, nope.
Nope. So I think that's episode 1 Where can people find us?
On Facebook at Supposedly. And you can find us if you want to email us. We'd love to do some listener stories here later on. You can find us at supposedlypod@gmail.com. And what's our Twitter, Rue?
So we are on the Twitter at supposedlypod, all one word. And then our Insta is the same, right?
Yeah, our Insta is also Supposedly Pod. So please find us, share your stories with us, talk about some topics that you'd like us to cover, because we would love to explore all things spooky, paranormal, odd,
Absolutely.
creepy, and macabre.
And we want to do like the weird stuff too. So if you have this, story that like no one's ever talked about, or it's hard to find on other podcasts, that's what we want to talk about, because I love podcasts. I mean, it's kind of a point where, I'm like, oh, I was listening to this podcast, and my friends are all like, of course you were, that's all you do. And it is to an extent. They keep me company in my sleepy little German village. But I mean, I do hear the same story sometimes. And so we want to make sure that we bring some diversity.
I don't want to cover things like the Winchester Mystery House. I mean, I love the stories of the Winchester Mystery House, but it's played out. We've all heard it. Let's go on some deep dives. Let's find some historical things that we haven't talked about before, or new hauntings and new creepy things.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of fun segments. We can't wait to bring you here on Supposedly.
Yeah, everybody knows Ted, so let's go a little further.
Let's just take this ride together.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Join us
next time on Supposedly.
Okay,
we were so out of sync.
Yep.
Let's try that again.
Join us next
time on Supposedly.
See, this is where I think people are trying to do the clap thing.
Okay.
All right.
You know what? Just join us next time on Supposedly. We'll be here.
Yeah. There you go. Join us next time on
Supposedly.